Have you ever felt that moment when everything you believed about your life suddenly shatters? When the person who promised to love you forever betrays that trust in the most painful way? That was me last year, standing in a 5-star restaurant, alone on my anniversary while my husband was across town with his mistress. What he didn't know was that I'd spent the past 5 years secretly becoming his boss. By the time he realized who really owned Prestige Auto Group, it was too late. The look on his face when I walked into that boardroom? Priceless. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The day I met Mark Johnson was the day I thought I'd found my forever. I was 26, fresh out of business school with big dreams and a job at a financial consulting firm in downtown Seattle. The rain was pouring that day, typical Seattle weather, and I ducked into a coffee shop to salvage what was left of my interview outfit. "You look like you could use this," a voice said, sliding an extra napkin my way as I tried to dry off. I looked up to see the most charming smile I'd ever encountered. Mark was everything I thought I wanted: confident, ambitious, and so sure of himself. He worked as a sales manager at Prestige Auto Group, one of Seattle's most exclusive luxury car dealerships. On our first date, he told me how he planned to run the place someday. I admired his drive. It matched my own. We got married 2 years later in a beautiful ceremony overlooking Puget Sound. My godfather, Edward Bennett, walked me down the aisle since my parents had passed away years earlier. Edward had been my mentor since college, guiding my career and investments with the wisdom that had made him one of Seattle's most respected business consultants. He whispered, "Remember, Rachel, always keep something that's just yours," as he gave me away. At the time, I thought it was just sweet advice from a protective godfather. I had no idea how prophetic those words would become. The first 5 years of our marriage were everything I dreamed of. Mark's career at Prestige Auto Group flourished. He became the top salesperson, then sales director, bringing home substantial commissions that fueled our comfortable lifestyle. I continued my finance career, eventually starting my own consulting practice specializing in business acquisition strategies. "You should let me handle the big financial decisions," Mark would say. "I deal with million-dollar transactions every day at work." I'd smile and nod, not mentioning that my client portfolio was now worth 10 times what he sold annually. I loved that he felt confident and never wanted to diminish that. Our anniversary became a sacred tradition for us. Every year, we'd return to Cascade, the upscale restaurant where we'd had our first official date. Mark would arrange everything: a corner table, champagne waiting, the works. For our 10th anniversary, I bought him an exquisite watch that he'd been eyeing for months. He seemed genuinely touched. "I don't deserve you, Rach," he said that night, kissing my hand across the table. Looking back, that might have been the most honest thing he ever told me. The signs had been there for a while: the late nights at dealer events, the mysterious weekends for sales retreats, the new cologne I hadn't purchased for him. But I kept pushing away the suspicions, focusing instead on the secret project that had consumed my attention for the past few years. It had started as an innocent conversation with Edward during one of our monthly mentor lunches. "The Peterson Group is looking to divest some of their holdings," he mentioned casually, including a certain luxury auto dealer network. The Peterson Group owned Prestige Auto Group, Mark's employer and his pathway to the success he'd always chased. "That's interesting," I replied, genuinely curious. "Mark says the business is booming." Edward nodded. "It is, which is why it's a good time to sell. Maximum value." He studied me carefully. "You know, Rachel, with your acquisition expertise and some private investors I could introduce you to, this could be a remarkable opportunity." "Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" I asked, my heart suddenly racing. "I'm suggesting that sometimes the best security lies in controlling your own destiny, he answered, "and perhaps your husband's as well." That conversation changed everything. Over the next 2 years, with Edward's guidance, I quietly assembled an investment group, created a holding company called RJ Ventures, my initials, hidden in plain sight, and strategically acquired Prestige Auto Group through a series of sophisticated transactions that kept the actual ownership veiled behind layers of corporate entities. Not once did I mention any of this to Mark. He came home excited one day, telling me that the dealership had been sold, but that the new owners had promised to keep all senior management in place. "There's some investment group," he said, loosening his tie. "But don't worry, baby. They've promised that I'm still on track to become general manager within the next year or two." I just smiled and asked if he wanted chicken or fish for dinner. The real turning point came 3 months ago. Our 11th anniversary was approaching, and I'd dropped hints for weeks about reservations at Cascade. Mark had seemed distracted, but assured me he'd remembered. I even heard him on the phone, seemingly confirming our reservations. That morning, he kissed me goodbye with extra affection. "Can't wait for tonight, Rach. I've got a surprise for you." I spent the day getting ready, spa treatment, hair appointment, slipping into the new dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion. A deep blue silk that reminded me of the ocean view from our wedding. At 6:30 p.m., my phone dinged with a text message from Mark. "Emergency at work. Big customer crisis. Need to handle personally. Might be late for dinner. Start without me?" I felt a flicker of disappointment, but chose to believe him. By 7:30, when I was seated at our usual table at Cascade, alone with a glass of champagne, the disappointment had hardened into suspicion. On impulse, I opened the tracking app we'd installed on each other's phones years ago, for safety. We'd both forgotten about it, or at least I thought we had. Mark's location showed him not at Prestige Auto Group, but at the Edgewater Hotel across town. I sat there, staring at my phone, the realization washing over me in waves. I paid for my untouched champagne and drove across town in a daze. I didn't even have a plan when I valeted my car at the Edgewater and walked into the lobby with my anniversary dress and perfectly done hair. "I'm meeting my husband, Mark Johnson," I told the receptionist with a confidence I didn't feel. "He mentioned dinner at your restaurant?" The receptionist smiled. "Of course, Mrs. Johnson. Mr. Johnson has a reservation at our waterfront restaurant. I believe he's already seated with his guest." I thanked her and walked to the restaurant entrance, where I could see through the glass walls to the elegant tables beyond. And there was Mark, sitting at a window table with a view of Elliott Bay, across from a woman I recognized immediately as Olivia Parker, the new event coordinator at Prestige. She was leaning forward, her hand resting on Mark's, her laughter carrying even through the glass. On the table between them sat a small jewelry box, the kind that typically holds a bracelet or necklace. I didn't make a scene. I didn't burst in with accusations flying. Instead, I took a photo with my phone, turned around, walked back to my car, and drove home in perfect, terrible clarity. When Mark came home that night around midnight, he had a practiced story about the customer emergency and how sorry he was to have missed our anniversary. He even pulled out a hastily purchased gift, a generic pair of earrings that looked nothing like my usual style. "You shouldn't have," I said, and I meant it literally. "I'll make it up to you," he promised, kissing my forehead. "Next weekend we'll do something special." I just nodded, already calculating my next move. The following Monday, I walked into Edward's office and closed the door. "I think it's time to accelerate our timeline," I said without preamble. "I want to step in as the active owner of Prestige Auto Group." Edward studied my face. Something happened. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway, showing him the photo I'd taken at the Edgewater. "Our anniversary dinner," I explained, my voice remarkably steady. He was with the events coordinator from work, Olivia Parker. Edward's expression darkened. "What do you need from me?" I need to know everything about the operations at Prestige. Every account, every client, every deal Mark has been involved with. I need to understand exactly what he's been doing there. Consider it done, Edward said, already reaching for his phone. And Rachel? Remember that you hold all the cards now. Over the next 2 weeks, I received detailed reports that painted an interesting picture. Mark had indeed been a top performer, but he'd also been cutting corners, inflating numbers, promising customers impossible delivery dates, even skimming small amounts from marketing budgets to fund his business development activities, which apparently included hotel rooms and gifts for Olivia Parker. I also learned that Mark had been lobbying hard with what he thought was the distant ownership group for a promotion to general manager, positioning himself as the dealership's most valuable asset. The current GM, Paul Whitman, was planning to retire within 6 months. Mark had been telling everyone, including me, that he was the obvious successor. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. What he didn't know was that I had already reviewed all the potential internal candidates and found his assistant manager, David Chen, to be far more qualified, with better customer satisfaction scores and without the ethical red flags. I decided it was time for RJ Ventures to make an appearance at Prestige Auto Group. I called a special management meeting through proper channels as the representative of the ownership group. The memo stated that RJ Ventures would be sending their principal to discuss the future leadership transition and strategic direction of the dealership. Mark was ecstatic when he saw the memo. "This is it, Rach," he told me that evening. "They're finally coming to announce my promotion. I need my best suit cleaned for Thursday." "You seem very confident," I observed, handing him the number for our dry cleaner. "Baby, I've earned this," he said, pulling me close. "And once I'm GM, we're going to have the life we've always dreamed about. Maybe even start thinking about that family we've been putting off." I extracted myself from his embrace, feeling slightly ill at his presumption. "That sounds nice," I lied. Thursday arrived with perfect dramatic timing. I dressed carefully, in a tailored charcoal suit with a silk blouse. Professional, powerful, but not overly flashy. I arrived at Prestige Auto Group 30 minutes before the scheduled meeting, instructing my driver to take me to the private entrance. Paul Whitman, the current GM, greeted me with the deference due to the owner. He was the only person at the dealership who knew my actual role. "Everything is prepared as you requested, Mrs. Johnson," he said, showing me to his office. "The management team will be gathering in the main conference room in 20 minutes. "And my husband?" I asked. "Mr. Johnson is currently showing a Lamborghini to a client, but he's assured me he'll be done in time for the meeting. He's been quite excited about this." I smiled. "I'm sure he has been." I used those 20 minutes to center myself. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about taking control of my life and securing my future. Mark's betrayal had simply accelerated a plan that was already in motion. At precisely 2 p.m., I walked into the conference room where the management team waited. 6 people sat around the table, including David Chen, various department heads, and Mark, who was checking his reflection in his phone camera. Everyone stood as I entered, with Paul making the introduction. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce Rachel Johnson, the principal owner of RJ Ventures and our parent company." The room went silent. Mark's face froze in an expression of utter confusion, followed by disbelief as his eyes met mine. "Thank you, Paul," I said calmly, taking my place at the head of the table. "Please, everyone be seated." No one moved. They were all staring at Mark and me, sensing the drama unfolding before them. "Rachel?" Mark finally managed. "What is this? Some kind of joke?" "Not at all," I replied, opening my portfolio. "RJ Ventures acquired Prestige Auto Group approximately 2 years ago. I'm here today to discuss our leadership transition plan as Paul moves toward retirement. The others slowly took their seats, eyes darting between us. Mark remained standing, his face fluctuating between confusion and anger. "You can't be serious," he said. "You don't know anything about running." "A car dealership." I smiled pleasantly. "On the contrary, Mark. I've been reviewing the operations of this dealership in detail for quite some time. In fact, I probably know more about what goes on here than anyone else in this room." I let that sink in for a moment before continuing. "Now, shall we proceed with the meeting, or do you need a moment?" Mark finally sank into his chair, his face ashen. I proceeded to outline the transition plan, announcing that David Chen would be assuming the general manager position upon Paul's retirement. David has consistently demonstrated exceptional leadership, integrity, and customer focus, I explained, sliding performance reports across the table. His approach aligns perfectly with the values and direction of RJ Ventures. I could see Mark gripping the edge of the table, his knuckles white. When I opened the floor for questions, he finally erupted. "This is ridiculous. I've been promised that position for years. I'm the top performer in this dealership." I met his gaze steadily. "By some metrics, yes. But leadership requires more than sales numbers, Mark. It requires integrity." I turned to the others. "Would anyone else like to comment on the transition plan?" The meeting proceeded with Mark sitting in stunned silence. Afterward, as the others filed out, he remained seated, waiting until we were alone. "How long?" he asked, his voice hollow. "How long have you been planning this?" "The acquisition?" "About 3 years," I replied honestly. "Revealing myself as the owner? That decision was more recent. Around the time you spent our anniversary with Olivia Parker at the Edgewater." His face paled further. "Rachel, I can explain—" "There's no need," I interrupted. "Your personal choices are your own. But when those choices intersect with my business, like using company resources to fund your affair or misrepresenting numbers to boost your commissions, then it becomes my concern." "So what happens now?" he asked, an edge of desperation in his voice. "You fire me? Humiliate me in front of everyone I work with?" I shook my head. "That would be petty, Mark, and bad business. You are still a valuable sales director. You can continue in that role reporting to David, provided you maintain ethical business practices. Your personal life is your own affair, quite literally, it seems." Mark stared at me, trying to process the complete reversal of power between us. "And at home?" I stood up, gathering my materials. "I've already moved my things to a new apartment. The divorce papers will be delivered to you tomorrow. I think we both know this marriage has been over for some time." As I walked toward the door, Mark called after me, his voice breaking slightly. "Did you ever love me, Rachel? Or was this all some elaborate setup from the beginning?" I paused, turning back to face the man I had once built my life around. "I loved you completely, Mark. Buying this dealership was originally my way of supporting your dreams, of being a partner in the future you always talked about." I allowed myself a sad smile. "The irony is that while you were cheating on me with Olivia, I was working to give you everything you said you wanted." I left him sitting there in the conference room, surrounded by the evidence of his professional failings and personal betrayals. That night, in my new apartment overlooking Lake Washington, I finally allowed myself to cry. Not for the marriage I'd lost, but for the woman I'd been who believed in fairy tales and happy endings. When the tears eventually stopped, I felt lighter somehow, as if I'd shed not just Mark, but the weight of expectations I'd been carrying for years. Edward called to check on me. "How did it go?" "Exactly as it needed to," I replied. "How did you know all those years ago that I'd need this kind of protection?" He was quiet for a moment. "I didn't know specifically what would happen, but I've seen enough of life to understand that true security comes from having options." You've created your own options, Rachel. I just pointed you in the right direction. In the months that followed, Prestige Auto Group flourished under David's leadership. Mark continued as sales director, subdued and professional in his dealings with me. Occasionally, I'd catch him watching me during my visits to the dealership, a mixture of regret and bewilderment in his eyes. As for Olivia Parker, she resigned shortly after my revelation, apparently finding greener pastures at a dealership across town. I sometimes wonder if Mark still sees her, but I've realized it no longer matters to me. The divorce was finalized last month. Mark didn't contest any of my terms, perhaps realizing how much worse it could have been. I was fair, more fair than he deserved, according to my lawyer, but I kept full ownership of RJ Ventures and Prestige Auto Group. Yesterday, I received a letter from Mark. Inside was the watch I'd given him for our 10th anniversary, and a simple note. You were right. About everything. I'm sorry I couldn't be the man you deserved. I placed the watch in my desk drawer and turned my attention to the expansion plans for Prestige Auto Group. We're acquiring 2 more dealerships next month. People often ask if I regret how things turned out. The truth is, I don't. Mark's betrayal hurt deeply, but it also freed me from the constraints of a marriage that had become a performance. Now I live authentically, running my businesses openly and building a life that's truly mine. The lesson I learned wasn't about revenge, though the look on Mark's face in that conference room will admittedly stay with me forever. It was about the power of patience, preparation, and taking control of my own narrative. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about hurting the other person. It's about reclaiming yourself. We got married 2 years later, in a beautiful ceremony overlooking Puget Sound. My godfather, Edward Bennett, walked me down the aisle since my parents had passed away years earlier. Edward had been my mentor since college, guiding my career and investments with the wisdom that had made him one of Seattle's most respected business consultants. He whispered, "Remember, Rachel, always keep something that's just yours," as he gave me away. At the time, I thought it was just sweet advice from a protective godfather. I had no idea how prophetic those words would become. The first 5 years of our marriage were everything I'd dreamed of. Mark's career at Prestige Auto Group flourished. He became the top salesperson, then sales director, bringing home substantial commissions that fueled our comfortable lifestyle. I continued my finance career, eventually starting my own consulting practice specializing in business acquisition strategies. "You should let me handle the big financial decisions," Mark would say. "I deal with million-dollar transactions every day at work." I'd smile and nod, not mentioning that my client portfolio was now worth 10 times what he sold annually. Loved that he felt confident and never wanted to diminish that. Our anniversary became a sacred tradition for us. Every year we'd return to Cascade, the upscale restaurant where we'd had our first official date. Mark would arrange everything: a corner table, champagne waiting, the works. For our 10th anniversary, I bought him an exquisite watch that he'd been eyeing for months. He seemed genuinely touched. "I don't deserve you, Rach," he said that night, kissing my hand across the table. Looking back, that might have been the most honest thing he ever told me. The signs had been there for a while. The late nights at dealer events, the mysterious weekends for sales retreats, the new cologne I hadn't purchased for him. But I kept pushing away the suspicions, focusing instead on the secret project that had consumed my attention for the past few years. It had started as an innocent conversation with Edward during one of our monthly mentor lunches. "The Peterson Group is looking to divest some of their holdings," he mentioned casually, "including a certain luxury auto dealer network." The Peterson Group owned Prestige Auto Group, Mark's employer, and his pathway to the success he'd always chased. "That's interesting," I replied, genuinely curious. "Mark says the business is booming." Edward nodded. "It is, which is why it's a good time to sell. Maximum value." He studied me carefully. "You know, Rachel, With your acquisition expertise and some private investors I could introduce you to, this could be a remarkable opportunity. Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? I asked, my heart suddenly racing. I'm suggesting that sometimes the best security lies in controlling your own destiny, he answered, and perhaps your husband's as well. That conversation changed everything. Over the next 2 years, with Edward's guidance, I quietly assembled an investment group, created a holding company called RJ Ventures, my initials, hidden in plain sight, and strategically acquired Prestige Auto Group through a series of sophisticated transactions that kept the actual ownership veiled behind layers of corporate entities. Not once did I mention any of this to Mark. He came home excited one day, telling me that the dealership had been sold, but that the new owners had promised to keep all senior management in place. There's some investment group, he said, loosening his tie. But don't worry, baby. They've promised that I'm still on track to become general manager within the next year or two. I just smiled and asked if he wanted chicken or fish for dinner. What Mark didn't realize was that I was now receiving weekly reports on every aspect of Prestige Auto Group's operations. I knew about the deals he closed, the customers he charmed, and even the long lunches he took with certain colleagues. I initially justified this surveillance as responsible business ownership. I had investors to answer to after all. But as time went on, I began to pay particular attention to his interactions with Olivia Parker. Olivia had joined Prestige about a year earlier as the events coordinator. Her job was to organize test drive experiences for VIP clients, manage launch parties for new vehicle models, and coordinate the dealership's presence at luxury lifestyle events throughout Seattle. She was beautiful, ambitious, and according to the reports from Paul Whitman, exceptionally good at her job. I first noticed her name appearing alongside Mark's on expense reports, client dinners that stretched late into the evening, weekend product showcases that somehow required both the sales director and events coordinator to attend. Again, I could justify these as legitimate business activities, but something in my gut told me there was more. As our 11th anniversary approached, I found myself watching Mark more closely. He seemed distracted, constantly checking his phone with a smile I once thought was reserved for me. When I asked about our plans for our anniversary dinner, he assured me it was all handled. Don't worry, Rach. Same as always. Cascade, corner table, the works. Wouldn't miss it for the world. I wanted to believe him, so I did what any suspicious wife with access to business records might do. I checked his calendar through the dealership system. There it was, blocked out for our anniversary evening. Dinner with RJ, Cascade, 7:30 p.m. I felt a momentary wave of relief. That relief evaporated the next day when I checked again and found the entry modified. Potential investor dinner, the Edgewater, 7:30 p.m. My heart sank. There was no investor meeting. I had access to every scheduled business development activity at Prestige, and nothing was on the books for that evening. I could have confronted him then, but something held me back. Perhaps it was pride, or maybe it was the methodical businesswoman in me that wanted to gather all the facts before making a decision. Whatever the reason, I decided to wait and see what would happen on our anniversary night. The morning of our anniversary, Mark was unusually attentive. He brought me coffee in bed, kissed me deeply, and even left a small gift box on the counter before heading to work. A pair of earrings that didn't match anything I owned or would ever wear. Just a little something to start the day, he said, with a wink. The real surprise comes tonight. I felt nauseated as I opened the box. The earrings were ostentatious and clearly chosen in haste, nothing like the careful, thoughtful gifts he'd given in earlier years. They were an afterthought, a preemptive apology for what he was about to do. As I prepared for the evening, hair appointment, makeup, slipping into the new dress I'd purchased specifically for our anniversary, I kept telling myself that perhaps I was wrong. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe the calendar entry was a mistake or a misunderstanding. And then his text came at 6:30 p.m. Emergency at work. Big customer crisis. Need to handle personally. Might be late for dinner. Start without me? I sat on the edge of our bed, staring at the message. The careful wording, the plausible deniability, the suggestion that I begin our anniversary celebration alone. It was all so calculated, so practiced. This wasn't the first time he'd sent such a message, I realized. Just the first time I'd seen it for what it was. I arrived at Cascade precisely at 7:30 p.m. The maitre d' recognized me immediately. Mrs. Johnson, welcome back. Your usual table is ready. Will Mr. Johnson be joining you soon? He's running late, I replied with a practiced smile. Work emergency. The sympathy in his eyes told me he'd heard this before, perhaps from countless wives sitting alone on special occasions while their husbands were elsewhere. I ordered a glass of champagne and waited, checking the tracking app we'd installed on each other's phones for safety years earlier. The little blue dot that represented Mark was indeed at the Edgewater Hotel, not at Prestige Auto Group as his text had implied. I sat there for 30 minutes, sipping champagne that tasted increasingly bitter, before making my decision. I paid for my drink, thanked the staff, and drove across town to the Edgewater. The hotel overlooked Elliott Bay, its classic Northwest architecture and panoramic water views, making it one of Seattle's most romantic destinations. I'd always hinted to Mark that I'd love to spend a weekend there. Apparently, he'd been paying attention, just not for my benefit. I approached the front desk with a confidence born of anger and hurt. Good evening. My husband is dining here. Tonight. Mark Johnson? I'm supposed to meet him. The receptionist smiled warmly. Of course, Mrs. Johnson. Mr. Johnson has a reservation at our waterfront restaurant. He's already seated with his guest. Thank you, I managed, walking slowly toward the restaurant entrance. Through the glass walls, I could see tables arranged along the windows, each offering a stunning view of the water and the Olympic mountains beyond. And there, at a prime corner table, sat Mark. Across from him was Olivia Parker, looking radiant in a red dress that complemented her dark hair. She was leaning forward, laughing at something Mark had said, her hand resting casually on his. Between them, a bottle of expensive champagne, our champagne, the brand we'd had at our wedding, chilled in an ice bucket. And on the table sat a small jewelry box, larger than the one that had held my hastily purchased earrings that morning. I didn't go in. I didn't create a scene or demand explanations. Instead, I took out my phone and snapped a photo. Evidence, for myself, proof that I wasn't imagining things or jumping to conclusions. Then I turned and walked back through the lobby, nodding politely at the receptionist who had unknowingly confirmed my worst fears. In my car, I sat staring at the photo I'd taken. There they were, my husband and his mistress, caught in their betrayal. I felt strangely calm, almost detached. The pain would come later, I knew. But in that moment, clarity washed over me. This wasn't just about an affair. It was about years of small deceptions that had led to this moment. The late nights, the business trips, the gradual emotional distance that I'd attributed to work stress, or the natural evolution of a long-term relationship. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing with questions. How long had it been going on? Was Olivia the first, or merely the latest? Had I been blind, or simply unwilling to see? When Mark returned home shortly after midnight, I was sitting in our darkened living room, still wearing my anniversary dress. Rachel? He called, surprise evident in his voice as he flipped on the lights. What are you doing sitting in the dark? Thinking, I replied. How was the customer emergency? He loosened his tie with practiced ease. Nightmare. Some guy with a custom order throwing a fit about delivery timing. Had to talk him down for hours. He ran a hand through his hair, looking appropriately exhausted. I'm so sorry about dinner, babe. I'll make it up to you this weekend, I promise. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Not the one I'd seen at the Edgewater, but similar. I was going to give you this at Cascade, but... He shrugged, offering the box to me. I took it without opening it. It's fine, Mark. These things happen. He seemed relieved by my acceptance, mistaking my calm for understanding. You're the best, Rach. I don't deserve you. No, I agreed quietly. You don't. If he noticed the edge in my voice, he didn't show it. He kissed the top of my head and headed upstairs, calling back, "Coming to bed?" "In a bit," I answered. When I heard the shower running, I finally opened the gift box. Inside was a diamond bracelet, elegant but generic, the kind of thing you'd buy when you knew you needed something impressive, but hadn't put much thought into it. I wondered if Olivia had received the jewelry box I'd seen at the Edgewater, and if her gift had been chosen with more care. I placed the bracelet back in its box and set it on the coffee table. Then I took out my phone and called Edward. "It's late," he answered, concern evident in his voice. "Everything all right?" "I need to accelerate our timeline," I said without preamble. "How quickly can we prepare for me to take an active role at Prestige?" There was a pause. Then, "What happened?" "Rachel? Mark is having an affair with Olivia Parker, the events coordinator." Another pause. "Are you certain?" "I saw them together tonight, at the Edgewater, during our anniversary dinner." Edward sighed heavily. "I'm sorry, Rachel, truly. As for the timeline, we can have everything ready within 2 weeks if needed. The quarterly management review is coming up. It would be a natural time for RJ Ventures to make an appearance." 2 weeks, I repeated. "That works. And Edward? I want to know everything. Every deal Mark has touched, every expense report, every client interaction." "Consider it done," he replied. "And Rachel, remember that you're in control now." After we hung up, I sat in the living room for a long time, listening to the sounds of Mark getting ready for bed. The shower stopped. Drawers opened and closed. The familiar creak of our mattress as he settled in. Eventually, his soft snores filtered down the stairs. I thought about going up, climbing into bed beside him, and pretending for one more night that our marriage was what I'd thought it was. Instead, I kicked off my heels, curled up on the couch, and allowed myself to cry. Silently, the tears streaming down my face unchecked. This wasn't how the story was supposed to go. We were supposed to grow old together, build a family, support each other's dreams. Mark was supposed to be the one person I could trust completely. As dawn broke over Seattle, I made myself a cup of coffee and looked out at our carefully landscaped backyard. The life we'd built together suddenly felt like an elaborate stage set. Beautiful to look at, but lacking substance behind the facade. I knew what I needed to do. The businesswoman in me, the one who had quietly acquired a luxury auto dealership, group right under her husband's nose, took over. This was no longer about saving a marriage. It was about taking control of my life and securing my future. Over the next 2 weeks, I lived a double life. At home, I was still Rachel Johnson, devoted, wife, maintaining the appearance of normalcy while Mark continued his deceptions. He came home late 3 more times, each with a different excuse. He took a weekend sales training trip to Portland that I knew from dealership records didn't exist. He bought me flowers for no reason, his guilt manifesting in grand but empty gestures. I smiled and accepted it all, even as I prepared to dismantle the foundation of his carefully constructed world. At work, I became fully immersed in the operations of Prestige Auto Group. Edward provided comprehensive reports on every aspect of the business, with particular attention to Mark's activities. The picture that emerged was troubling, but not entirely surprising. Mark was indeed a top performer in terms of sales numbers, but his methods were increasingly questionable. He had a pattern of promising customers delivery dates that were impossible to meet, then scrambling to placate them when deadlines were missed. He inflated performance metrics in his reports to management. Most concerning, he had been using the dealership's client entertainment budget to fund his relationship with Olivia. Dinners, weekend getaways disguised as industry events, even jewelry purchased through vendor accounts that were later reimbursed as marketing expenses. He's putting the entire dealership at risk, Paul Whitman, the current general manager, told me during a confidential meeting at Edward's office. Not just financially, but reputationally. We've had 2 complaints from female customers about his overly familiar behavior. I've warned him, but he just laughs it off. And Olivia Parker? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Paul shifted uncomfortably. She's actually very good at her job. The events she coordinates are flawless, and our client engagement metrics have improved significantly since she came on board. But, he hesitated. But? Her relationship with Mark is creating tension among the staff. Everyone knows, and it's affecting morale. Several people have complained about favoritism. I nodded, processing this information. What about David Chen, Mark's assistant manager? I've been reviewing his performance metrics. Paul's expression brightened. David is outstanding, meticulous, honest, excellent with customers. He doesn't have Mark's flash or sales numbers, but his customer retention rate is the highest in the dealership. The clients who work with David stay with us for years. And if you were to choose your successor? I asked. David, Paul answered without hesitation, in a heartbeat. This confirmed what I had already begun to suspect. Mark's position as heir apparent to the general manager role was based more on his self-promotion than his actual qualifications. He had cultivated an image of indispensability, but the reality was quite different. Armed with this knowledge, I finalized my plans. RJ Ventures would make its official appearance at Prestige Auto Group during the quarterly management review. I would reveal myself as the principal owner and announce the leadership transition plan, with David Chen named as Paul's successor. The night before the meeting, Mark was particularly attentive. He came home early with takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant and a bottle of wine. Let's have a quiet night in, he suggested, setting the table with actual plates instead of the paper ones we normally used for takeout. I've been so busy lately, I feel like we haven't connected. I smiled and played along, wondering if he sensed something was about to change. That sounds perfect. Over dinner, he talked enthusiastically about the dealership's future and his role in it. The quarterly review is tomorrow. Word is that someone from the ownership group is finally making an appearance. This could be it, Rach, the moment they announce my promotion. You seem very confident, I observed, sipping my wine. I've earned it, he replied, reaching across the table to take my hand. And once I'm GM, things are going to be different. More time at home. Maybe we can finally start thinking about a family. The casual way he wove our future plans into his web of lies almost made me laugh. Instead, I squeezed his hand and asked, "Is that what you want? A family?" "Of course," he said, his expression earnest. "You, me, a couple of kids, the house with the white picket fence, the whole American dream." I studied his face, searching for some sign that he recognized the absurdity of planning a family while actively betraying our marriage. There was none. In Mark's world, these contradictions seemed to coexist without conflict. "What about you?" he asked. "Is that still what you want?" For a moment, I considered telling him everything, about RJ Ventures, about the Edgewater, about the decisions I'd made that would change both our lives forever. Instead, I smiled and said, "I want to be happy, Mark, that's all." He accepted this as agreement, as he always did, interpreting my words to fit his narrative. We finished dinner with Mark outlining his vision for the dealership's future under his leadership, completely unaware that in less than 24 hours, that future would evaporate before his eyes. When we went to bed that night, Mark pulled me close, kissing me with an intensity that had been absent for months. I allowed it, responding mechanically as he made love to me, wondering if he was comparing me to Olivia. If this sudden attention was driven by guilt or simply a celebratory mood about his anticipated promotion. Afterward, as he slept soundly, beside me, I stared at the ceiling, mentally rehearsing what I would say at tomorrow's meeting. There would be no emotional outbursts, no accusations, no mention of our personal relationship. This was business, and I would handle it as such, with precision, clarity, and complete control. In the morning, I dressed with particular care, choosing a tailored charcoal suit that conveyed authority without ostentation. Mark whistled appreciatively as I put the finishing touches on my makeup. "Big day at the consulting firm?" he asked, adjusting his tie in the mirror. "You could say that," I replied. "A major client presentation." "Well, you look amazing," he said, kissing my cheek. "Knock? I'm dead." I watched him leave, heading off to what he thought would be his triumph, completely unaware that I would be arriving at the same destination, albeit through a different entrance and with a very different agenda. "Ready?" Edward asked when I arrived at his office an hour later. I took a deep breath and nodded. "Ready." Edward and I arrived at Prestige Auto Group 30 minutes before the scheduled quarterly review meeting. Paul Whitman met us at the private entrance, away from the showroom where Mark would be finishing up with clients. "Everything is prepared as you requested, Mrs. Johnson," Paul said, leading us through the back hallway toward the executive offices. "The management team will be gathering in the conference room at 2 o'clock sharp." "And my husband?" I asked. Paul's expression was carefully neutral. "Mr. Johnson is currently with a client, the Henderson sale. He's assured me he'll be done in time for the meeting. He's been quite enthusiastic about today." I could imagine. Mark had been practically glowing that morning, convinced his moment of triumph had finally arrived. Paul showed us to his office where I could prepare for the meeting. "Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water?" "I'm fine, thank you," I replied, setting my portfolio on his desk. "Has David Chen arrived yet?" "He's reviewing the quarterly sales reports in his office. Should I bring him in for a private word before the meeting?" I considered this. "No, I think it's best if everyone hears the announcement together. Less chance of information leaking prematurely." Paul nodded and left us alone. Edward settled into a chair across from me, his expression concerned. "Are you absolutely certain about this, Rachel? Once you walk into that conference room, there's no turning back. Your marriage, your personal life, everything changes." I met his gaze steadily. "My marriage changed the moment Mark decided to spend our anniversary with another woman. This is just making it official." I straightened the documents in my portfolio. "Besides, this isn't just about Mark's infidelity. It's about protecting a business that employs dozens of people, a business that deserves better leadership than what Mark can provide." Edward studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "For what it's worth, I think William and Catherine would be proud of the woman you've become." The mention of my parents brought a momentary tightness to my throat. They had both died in a car accident during my sophomore year of college, the reason Edward had become such an important figure in my life. They had been straight-shooting, hard-working people who believed in honest dealings and personal integrity. "I hope so," I said quietly. At precisely 1:55 p.m., Paul returned to escort us to the conference room. Through the glass walls, I could see the management team assembling, department heads taking their seats, administrative staff setting up refreshments, and Mark holding court in the center of the room, gesturing animatedly as he spoke to a group of attentive listeners. "Wait here," Paul suggested, indicating a small alcove just outside the conference room. "I'll call the meeting to order and introduce you formally." I nodded, watching as Paul entered the room. The chatter immediately died down as he took his place at the head of the table. Mark reluctantly moved to his seat, though I noticed he'd positioned himself at the opposite end, already assuming the role of co-leader. Ladies and gentlemen, Paul began, his voice carrying clearly through the glass. Thank you all for being here today. As you know, this quarterly review is particularly significant as we have a special guest joining us from RJ Ventures, the principal owner of Prestige Auto Group. A murmur ran through the room. I saw Mark straighten his tie and smooth his hair, an expectant smile on his face. This is a somewhat unusual situation, Paul continued, so I want to thank you all in advance for your professionalism. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Rachel Johnson, the principal of RJ Ventures. I took a deep breath and entered the room, Edward following a few steps behind. The collective shock was palpable, heads turning, eyes widening, whispers erupting around the table. But my focus was solely on Mark, whose expression transformed from confusion to disbelief to dawning horror in the span of seconds. Thank you, Paul, I said calmly, taking my place at the head of the table. Good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate you all being here today. No one spoke. All eyes darted between Mark and me, sensing the drama unfolding before them. Rachel? Mark finally managed, his voice a blend of confusion and mounting anger. What is this? Some kind of joke? Not at all, I replied, opening my portfolio. As Paul mentioned, RJ Ventures acquired Prestige Auto Group approximately 2 years ago. The R and J stand for Rachel Johnson. I'm here today to discuss our leadership transition plan as Paul moves toward his well-deserved retirement. The room remained silent, everyone waiting to see how this extraordinary scene would play out. Mark had half risen from his seat, his knuckles white where they gripped the edge of the table. You can't be serious, he said, his voice rising. You don't know anything about running a car dealership. On the contrary, I countered smoothly. I've been reviewing the operations of this dealership in detail for the past 2 years. I'm intimately familiar with our sales figures, customer satisfaction metrics, profitability ratios, and personnel performance. I glanced around the table. In fact, I've had the pleasure of reading reports from everyone in this room, though we haven't had the opportunity to meet face-to-face until now. Mark sank back into his chair, his face ashen. The others were watching him, waiting for his reaction. So, I continued, laying out the presentation folders I'd prepared. Let's discuss the leadership transition plan. As most of you know, Paul has expressed his intention to retire within the next 6 months. He has been an exemplary general manager, and filling his shoes will be a challenge. I paused, letting my gaze move around the table, deliberately avoiding Mark. After careful consideration of all candidates, both internal and external, I'm pleased to announce that David Chen will be assuming the role of general manager upon Paul's retirement. David, seated midway down the table, looked stunned. Mrs. Johnson, thank you, he stammered. Mark shot to his feet. This is ridiculous. I've been promised that position for years. My numbers are twice David's. I met his gaze calmly. Sales numbers are just one metric of leadership potential, Mark. We've evaluated all aspects of performance, including customer satisfaction, team management, ethical business practices, and long-term relationship building. David has consistently excelled in these areas. Mark's face flushed with anger. This is personal. You're using the business to get back at me for something. A few uncomfortable glances were exchanged around the table. I kept my expression professional. This is a business decision based on performance data and leadership qualities. Nothing more. I gestured to the folders. You'll find the complete evaluation metrics and transition plan in the materials provided. I welcome your questions after you've had a chance to review them. For the next hour, I conducted the meeting as if it were any other business discussion, reviewing quarterly performance, outlining strategic initiatives, and fielding questions from the management team. Throughout, Mark sat in seething silence, barely glancing at the materials in front of him. As the meeting concluded, I stood to leave. Thank you all for your attention today. I'll be working closely with Paul and David over the coming months to ensure a smooth transition. My door is always open for any concerns or suggestions. People began filing out, many stopping to introduce themselves personally or congratulate David. Mark remained seated, staring at the table in front of him. When the room had emptied except for Paul, Edward, Mark, and myself, Paul tactfully suggested, "Edward, perhaps you'd like to see the new showroom renovations we discussed." Edward nodded, following Paul out and closing the door behind them. Mark finally looked up at me, his expression a mixture of rage and bewilderment. "How long have you been planning this?" "The acquisition?" "About 3 years," I replied honestly. Revealing myself as the owner? That decision came more recently. "When?" he demanded. "When did you decide to humiliate me in front of my entire team?" "Around the time you decided to spend our anniversary with Olivia Parker at the Edgewater Hotel." The color drained from his face. "You knew about that?" "I was at Cascade waiting for you. When you texted about your customer emergency, I checked your location." I kept my voice even despite the hurt that still lingered. "You really should have turned off the tracking app if you were going to lie about where you were." Mark ran. A hand through his hair, his breathing uneven. "Rachel, I can explain." "There's no need," I interrupted. "Your personal life is your business. But when you use company resources to fund your affair, or when you manipulate sales numbers to inflate your commissions, or when you pressure staff to cover for your absences, then it becomes my concern as the owner of this dealership." His eyes narrowed. "You've been spying on me." "I've been monitoring the business I own. There's a difference." I gathered my materials. For what it's worth, if you had been the leader this dealership needed, ethical, responsible, focused on long-term growth rather than short-term gains, you would be sitting in the general manager's chair regardless of our personal situation. "So what happens now?" he asked, an edge of desperation in his voice. "You fire me? Humiliate me further?" I shook my head. "Firing you would be bad business. Despite your creative approaches to sales, you do bring in significant revenue. You can continue as sales director, reporting to David, provided you maintain ethical business practices going forward." Mark stared at me in disbelief. "You expect me to work for David? To stay here knowing my wife owns the company?" "That's entirely your choice," I replied. "As for being your wife?" I paused, the weight of what I was about to say finally hitting me. "I've already spoken with a lawyer. The divorce papers will be delivered tomorrow. I've moved my things to a new apartment." Something flickered in Mark's eyes. Panic, perhaps. Or the first genuine emotion I'd seen from him in months. "Rachel, wait. We can fix this. I made a mistake with Olivia, but it didn't mean anything." "It meant something to me," I said quietly. "But even if I could forgive the affair, I can't unsee who you've become. Someone who lies without hesitation, who uses people and discards them, who believes rules don't apply to him. And you're so perfect," he shot back, anger replacing his brief vulnerability. "Secretly buying my company, watching me like some kind of spy, planning all this behind my back?" "I never claimed to be perfect," I acknowledged. "But I've been honest in my business dealings, loyal to my commitments, and true to my word. Can you say the same?" Mark had no answer. He looked suddenly defeated, slumping back in his chair. "One more thing," I added, reaching into my portfolio and withdrawing a document. "This is a confidentiality agreement regarding our personal situation. It stipulates that neither of us will disparage the other professionally or discuss the details of our separation with colleagues, clients, or competitors. So I'm supposed to pretend everything's fine, that my wife didn't just steal my promotion and serve me divorce papers in the span of an hour?" "You're supposed to be a professional," I corrected. "The agreement protects both of us and, more importantly, protects the dealership and its employees from becoming collateral damage in our private issues." Mark took the document without reading it. Did you ever love me at all, Rachel? Or was this all some elaborate scheme from the beginning? The question caught me off guard with its raw honesty. I loved you completely, I said after a moment. When I first heard about the opportunity to acquire Prestige, it was because I wanted to support your dreams. I thought we were building a future together. I moved toward the door, pausing with my hand on the handle. The irony is that while you were betraying me with Olivia, I was working to secure the very thing you always wanted, control of this dealership. I just never expected you'd force me to choose between being your wife and being a responsible business owner. I left. Him sitting there, surrounded by the evidence of his professional failures and personal betrayals. Outside, Edward was waiting for me. How did it go? About as expected, I replied, emotion finally catching in my throat. Can we get out of here? He nodded, placing a supportive hand on my shoulder as we walked toward the exit. Several employees watched us pass, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and concern. I maintained my composure until we reached my car in the private lot. Once inside, I gripped the steering wheel and finally allowed the tears to come. Not the silent, dignified weeping of the night I discovered Mark's betrayal, but deep, body-shaking sobs that seemed to emanate from my very core. Edward sat quietly beside me, offering a handkerchief but no platitudes. He understood that some pain needs to be experienced fully before it can begin to heal. I thought it would feel different, I managed finally, wiping my eyes. More satisfying somehow. Revenge often feels hollow, Edward observed, even when justified. It wasn't about revenge, I insisted, though part of me wondered if that was entirely true. It was about taking control, about doing what's right for the business. Edward nodded, not challenging my assertion. What will you do now? I took a deep breath, composing myself. Now I run the company I've acquired, support the people who work for me, and build the life I want, not the one Mark or anyone else expects me to have. And personally, I stared out the window at the dealership building, its modern glass facade reflecting the cloudy Seattle sky. Personally, I need time. Time to grieve for the marriage I thought I had. Time to figure out who Rachel Johnson is when she's not trying to be Mark's perfect wife. Edward squeezed my hand. I think you're already well on your way. That night, alone in my new apartment overlooking Lake Washington, I allowed myself a glass of wine and a moment of reflection. The place was sparsely furnished, just the essentials I'd purchased in the weeks leading up to today's revelation, plus a few treasured items I'd removed from our home while Mark was away on his fabricated Portland trip. My phone had been buzzing with notifications all evening, text messages from Mark alternating between anger, pleading, and accusations, emails from Prestige staff expressing their surprise and congratulations, a particularly touching note from David thanking me for my faith in him. I responded only to David's message, assuring him that my confidence in his abilities was well-founded and that I looked forward to working with him to grow the dealership. As for Mark's messages, I let them accumulate unanswered. There was nothing left to say that hadn't been said in that conference room. Instead, I found myself looking through old photos on my laptop. Pictures from our wedding, from vacations, from the early years when Mark's smile had seemed genuine and his love tangible. Had it all been an illusion? Or had something changed? Along the way, some gradual erosion of character that had transformed the man I married into the person who could so easily betray me? I would probably never know, and perhaps it didn't matter anymore. My phone rang, interrupting my melancholy browsing. Edward's name appeared on the screen. Checking to make sure I haven't jumped off the balcony, I answered, attempting humor. Actually, I'm calling with news, he replied, his tone serious. Mark has been making calls to board members, to key clients, to industry contacts. He's trying to rally support, suggesting that you're emotionally unstable and making rash business. Decisions due to marital issues. I sighed, closing my laptop. I'm not surprised. Wounded ego, wounded pride. He's lashing out. It's more calculated than that, Edward warned. He's trying to undermine your authority before it's firmly established. If enough key stakeholders express concerns, it could create problems for your leadership transition. I considered this. Mark knew the auto industry intimately, its power players, its unwritten rules, its old boys network. I had the legal authority as owner, but business was about relationships as much as legal rights. What do you suggest? I asked. Accelerate the transition, meet with key clients personally, secure their confidence, and perhaps most importantly, address the staff as a whole, not just the management team. They're hearing rumors, speculation. They need reassurance from the top. Tomorrow, I decided. I'll speak to everyone tomorrow morning, and I'll start scheduling client meetings immediately. After hanging up, I opened my laptop again, this time focusing not on the past, but on the future. I worked late into the night, crafting a comprehensive communication plan and preparing my address to the staff. By morning, I had my strategy in place. I arrived at Prestige an hour before the dealership opened, arranged for all staff to gather in the showroom, and waited as they filed in. Salespeople, mechanics, administrative staff, detail crew, every person who contributed to the dealership's operations. Mark was conspicuously absent, but I hadn't expected him to show. According to Paul, he hadn't returned to the dealership after our confrontation, calling in to say he was taking personal days. Good morning, everyone, I began once all were assembled. For those who haven't heard yet, I'm Rachel Johnson, the principal owner of RJ Ventures, which acquired Prestige Auto Group 2 years ago. I know this comes as a surprise to many of you, particularly given that I'm also Mark Johnson's wife. A murmur ran through the crowd. I held up a hand to quiet them. I want to be transparent about a few things. First, yes, Mark and I are separating. This is a personal matter that we're handling privately, and I ask for your respect regarding that situation. Second, the leadership transition I announced yesterday, with David Chen succeeding Paul as general manager, is a business decision based on performance metrics and leadership qualities, not personal factors. I paused, looking around the room, making eye contact with as many people as possible. I understand change can be unsettling, especially when it comes with unexpected personal dynamics. But I want to assure you of one thing: my absolute commitment to the success of this dealership and to each of you who make it work. Your jobs are secure, your contributions are valued, and your future here is bright. I outlined my vision for Prestige: expanded services, enhanced customer experience, improved employee benefits, potential growth through acquisition of complementary dealerships. Throughout, I emphasized continuity and stability while acknowledging the innovations I hoped to bring. I'll be on site regularly in the coming weeks, I concluded. My door is always open for your questions, concerns, or ideas. Thank you for your attention this morning and for the excellent work you do every day. As the staff dispersed to prepare for opening, many approached me individually, some to introduce themselves, others to offer support or ask specific questions about their departments. The overall response seemed positive, though I noticed a few of Mark's closer allies keeping their distance, their expressions guarded. David joined me as the last of the staff returned to their positions. That was exactly what they needed to hear, he said. Thank you. How's the mood been? I asked. He considered this. Mixed. Shock, definitely. Some concern, especially among the sales team who work directly with Mark, but mostly curiosity and cautious optimism. He hesitated before adding, Mark called a few of the senior sales staff last night, tried to get them to threaten resignation if you went forward with the transition plan. Any takers? No, they like Mark as a sales leader, but they're not willing to risk their careers on what looks like a personal vendetta. I nodded, relieved but not surprised. Most people ultimately made practical decisions when their livelihoods were at stake. "Have you heard from him today?" I asked. David shook his head. Not directly, but his assistant got a text saying he'd be in later to clear a few things up. I checked my watch. "I'll be in Paul's office reviewing the customer files. Let me know when he arrives." The next few hours passed in a productive blur as I familiarized myself with the dealership's top clients, many of whom I knew only as names on reports until now. Paul and David provided valuable context, highlighting relationships that needed special attention and identifying opportunities for strengthening customer loyalty. Shortly before noon, David appeared in the doorway. "He's here," he said simply. I took a deep breath. "Where?" "His office, packing some personal items." I nodded. "Give us some privacy, please." I found Mark methodically emptying his desk drawers into a cardboard box. He looked terrible, unshaven, dark circles under his eyes, wearing the same shirt from yesterday, now rumpled. He barely glanced up when I entered. "Come to make sure I don't steal the paper clips?" he asked bitterly. "I came to see how you're doing," I replied, closing the door behind me. "How I'm doing?" He laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. "Let's see. My wife secretly bought my company, humiliated me in front of my colleagues, promoted my subordinate over me, and served me divorce papers. I'm just peachy." I leaned against the wall, watching him toss a collection of deal tombstones into his box. "The lawyer delivered the papers then?" "Left them with the doorman. Classy touch." "I didn't want another confrontation," I said. He stopped packing, finally looking directly at me. "What did you want, Rachel? What was the end game here? Complete destruction of my life? Because congratulations, mission accomplished. I wanted what I said I wanted. To protect a business that employs dozens of people, to ensure its leadership reflected its values, and yes, to take control of my own life after discovering my husband's betrayal." Mark shook his head. "You know what the worst part is? Not the humiliation or even losing the GM position. It's realizing that while I thought I knew everything about you, you were capable of this level of calculation. The Rachel I married couldn't have done this." "The Rachel you married trusted you completely," I countered. "She changed when that trust was broken." He resumed packing, more aggressively now. "So what happens if I sign these papers? We go our separate ways, pretend we never knew each." "Other? You run my dealership and I do what exactly?" "That's up to you. The offer to continue as sales director was genuine. You're good at what you do, Mark, when you're focused on the job rather than extracurricular activities." He snorted. "Work for my soon-to-be ex-wife and the guy who got the job I was promised? No thanks." "I'd expected as much." "Then I wish you the best wherever you land. You'll receive a fair severance package and I won't contest your unemployment benefits if you need them temporarily." Mark slammed a drawer shut. "Your generosity is overwhelming." We stood in uncomfortable silence for a moment, the weight of our failed marriage hanging between us. "Did you ever really love me?" he asked suddenly, echoing his question from the day before, but with a vulnerability that seemed more genuine now. "Yes," I said softly. "More than you apparently realized." He nodded slowly, absorbing this. "I did love you too, you know. In my way. It wasn't all an act. Maybe, but it wasn't enough. Was it? Not enough to keep you faithful, not enough to make you honest." He had no answer for that. Instead, he closed the now full box and lifted it. "I'll have my assistant come for the rest, and I'll sign your papers. There's no point dragging this out." As he reached the door, he paused. "For what it's worth, I am sorry, Rachel. Not just for getting caught, but for what I did. You deserved better." It was the first genuine apology I'd heard from him, and it caught me off guard. "Thank you for saying that." He nodded once, then left, walking past curious onlookers with his head high despite his disheveled appearance. I watched through the office window as he crossed the showroom floor one last time, a fallen king departing his former kingdom. Paul appeared at my side. "Everything all right?" "As all right as it can be," I replied. "He's not staying." "Not surprising. Mark has many talents, but humility isn't one of them." Paul gestured toward the sales floor where customers were beginning to arrive for the lunchtime rush. "Shall we get back to business?" I smiled, grateful for his matter-of-fact approach. "Yes, let's." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity as I established my presence at Prestige, meeting with clients, learning operations firsthand, and supporting David as he prepared to step into the general manager role. The staff gradually adjusted. To my leadership, initial wariness giving way to respect as they saw my commitment to their success and my willingness to listen to their concerns. Mark made good on his word, signing the divorce papers without contest and maintaining a dignified silence about our personal situation. I heard through industry contacts that he'd accepted a position with a competitor across town, a lateral move with promises of advancement. Part of me hoped he'd find better balance there, though I doubted his fundamental character would change. 1 month after my revelation at Prestige, Edward and I sat in my office reviewing the financial impact of recent changes. "Customer retention is up 8%, he noted, studying the latest reports. "And the workplace satisfaction survey shows marked improvement, especially in the service department." "David's influence," I explained. "He implemented that team-based bonus structure we discussed, and it's transformed the culture. People are collaborating instead of competing." "And the bottom line?" "Revenue is holding steady despite Mark's departure. His clients have largely stayed with us, distributed among the remaining sales team. Expenses are down due to elimination of some of Mark's more extravagant client entertainment budget items." Edward smiled. "So professionally speaking, this transition has been a success." "It appears so." "And personally?" he asked gently. I considered the question. The initial shock and pain of Mark's betrayal had gradually given way to a strange combination of numbness and clarity. I wasn't yet healed. That would take time. But I was moving forward with purpose. "I'm getting there," I said finally. "One day at a time." "You know," Edward mused, "your father once told me that the true measure of success isn't what you achieve, but who you become in the process." The mention of my father brought a familiar ache of loss, but also a comforting connection to my past. "And who have I become, in your opinion?" Edward's gaze was both proud and concerned. Someone who refuses to be a victim. Someone who turns betrayal into strength. Someone who prioritizes integrity over appearance. He paused. "But also someone who's built walls that might be difficult to take down when the time comes." I couldn't argue with his assessment. The experience had changed me fundamentally, made me stronger in many ways, but also more guarded, more skeptical. "Maybe the walls can come down gradually," I suggested. "When I'm ready." "I hope so," Edward replied. "Because the alternative is a life that's professionally successful, but personally isolated. And I want more than that for you, Rachel." His concern touched me. I want more than that too. But for now, this is enough. Running this business. Rebuilding my life. Finding out who Rachel Johnson is when she's standing on her own. Outside my office window, I could see the showroom floor where customers browsed gleaming luxury vehicles, assisted by knowledgeable sales staff. I could see the service area where technicians worked with precision on high-performance engines. I could see the future I was building, piece by piece. It wasn't the future I'd imagined when Mark had slipped a ring on my finger, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. 6 months after the dramatic boardroom revelation that changed everything, I sat in what was now definitively my office at Prestige Auto Group. reviewing the quarterly performance reports with a sense of quiet satisfaction. The dealership was thriving under David Chen's day-to-day leadership, with customer satisfaction ratings at an all-time high and sales figures that had not only weathered Mark's departure, but actually improved in his absence. Outside my office window, the showroom floor bustled with activity. Sales associates guiding clients through our latest luxury models, the finance team processing paperwork, detailers polishing vehicles to a mirror shine before delivery. It was a well-oiled machine, one that I now understood intimately from every angle. My intercom buzzed. "Ms. Johnson, your 2:00 is here," my assistant, Naomi, announced. "Send them in, please," I replied, closing the performance report and standing to greet my visitors. The door opened to reveal Edward, accompanied by a sharply dressed woman I recognized as Vanessa Liu, the owner of Velocity Imports, a high-end European car dealership across town. "Rachel," Edward said warmly as I came around the desk to greet them. "You remember Vanessa?" "Of course," I replied, shaking her hand. "Thank you for coming, Vanessa. It's been too long." "Indeed it has," Vanessa agreed, her keen eyes taking in the office with professional interest. "Though I must say, the last time we met, you weren't sitting on this side of the desk." I smiled at her reference to our previous meeting, nearly 3 years earlier, when I had visited her dealership as part of my initial market research before acquiring Prestige. Back then, I'd introduced myself simply as a business consultant, careful to reveal nothing of my true intentions. "Life takes unexpected turns," I offered, gesturing for them to sit. "Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water?" "Water would be fine," Vanessa replied. Edward declined with a small shake of his head. After Naomi brought in water and departed, closing the door behind her, Vanessa got straight to the point, a directness I'd always appreciated about her. "Edward tells me you're interested in discussing a potential acquisition," she said, setting her glass down. "I admit, I'm intrigued. Velocity isn't officially on the market." "The best opportunities rarely are," I replied. "And to be clear, I'm not looking to absorb your operation or replace your leadership. I'm interested in a partnership that would allow both dealerships to maintain their distinct identities while creating synergies in inventory management, marketing reach, and service capabilities." Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "An unusual approach in this industry. Most consolidations I've seen involve complete absorption and standardization." "I'm not most acquirers," I said with a small smile. "I believe the luxury car market in Seattle is diverse enough to support multiple specialized dealerships under a single ownership umbrella, each with its own expertise and client base." For the next hour, we discussed the broad strokes of what such a partnership might look like, the financial structure, operational autonomy, and growth potential. Vanessa was sharp, asking pointed questions that revealed both her business acumen and her genuine concern for her employees' future. "You've certainly done your homework," she acknowledged as our meeting drew to a close. "I'll need to review this with my advisors, of course, but I'm interested in continuing the conversation." "That's all I ask," I said, rising to walk her to the door. "Take whatever time you need. This isn't a limited-time offer." After Vanessa departed, Edward lingered, settling back into his chair with a thoughtful expression. "Well?" I asked, returning to my desk. "What did you think?" "I think she's intrigued," he replied, "and rightfully cautious. But the foundation is there." He studied me for a moment. "This is an ambitious play, Rachel. Building a luxury auto group to rival the major players won't be easy." "The best? Things rarely are," I countered, echoing Vanessa's earlier sentiment. "But the timing is right. The market is fragmented, financing is available at favorable rates, and we've proven with Prestige that the right leadership can transform performance." Edward nodded slowly. "Speaking of Prestige's transformation, have you seen the latest industry publication?" He reached into his briefcase and withdrew a glossy magazine, Auto Luxury Quarterly, open to a marked page. The headline read, Seattle's Prestige Auto Group, a case study in leadership transition and performance turnaround. I scanned the article, which detailed the dealership's improved metrics under new ownership and management, highlighting innovative customer service practices David had implemented. There was a tactful mention of leadership changes, but no reference to the personal drama that had accompanied them. David must be pleased, I commented, handing the magazine back. He was glowing when I showed him earlier, Edward confirmed, but I thought you'd be more excited about the industry recognition. I shrugged lightly. It's gratifying, of course, but external validation isn't what drives me these days. I gestured to the performance reports on my desk. The numbers tell me what I need to know. Edward's expression shifted to one of concern. Rachel, when was the last time you did something purely for pleasure? Something unrelated to business? The question caught me off guard. I had dinner with Melissa and Kate last week, I offered, referring to two college friends who had remained close despite our increasingly busy lives. And did you spend the entire dinner discussing acquisition strategies and market valuations? Edward asked with gentle knowingness. I felt a flash of defensive irritation, quickly suppressed. Not the entire dinner, I admitted. Maybe half. Edward leaned forward, his voice softening. It's been 6 months since the divorce was finalized. You've built an impressive professional foundation here. But I worry that you're using work to avoid rebuilding your personal life. I'm not avoiding anything, I protested, though even to my own ears the response sounded hollow. I'm focused on what matters right now. And nothing matters except business? Edward challenged. What about connections, Joy? The parts of life that give it meaning beyond the office? I sighed, recognizing the truth in his gentle rebuke. I'm not ready, I admitted quietly. Not yet. For what? Friendship? Fun? Or is it trust that you're not ready for? The question struck uncomfortably close to home. Since finalizing my divorce from Mark, I'd thrown myself into work with single-minded determination, building Prestige into an even more successful operation while carefully planning its expansion into a multi-dealership group. My days were filled with meetings, strategic planning, and operational reviews. My evenings were spent researching potential acquisitions or reviewing industry trends. What Edward was too kind to say directly was that I had created a life entirely devoid of personal vulnerability, no dating, minimal socializing, and an apartment that still looked like a temporary landing pad rather than a home. Maybe both, I finally acknowledged. After Mark, I'm not eager to give anyone else the power to hurt me that way. Edward's expression softened with understanding. The answer to betrayal isn't isolation, Rachel. It's discernment, learning, to trust wisely rather than not trusting at all. Before I could respond, my intercom buzzed again. Ms. Johnson, the Henderson delivery is ready for final inspection whenever you're free, Naomi announced. I'll be right there, I replied, grateful for the interruption. To Edward, I added, duty calls. It's a Bentley Continental GT, custom order. The client is particular. Edward stood, recognizing the conversation had reached its natural conclusion. Think about what I said. Life is meant to be lived, not merely managed. As I watched him, leave. His words lingered uncomfortably in my mind. Was he right? Had I replaced one prison, my marriage to Mark, with another of my own making? I pushed the thought aside and headed to the delivery area, where a gleaming Bentley awaited its new owner. This at least was straightforward. This I understood. The Henderson delivery went smoothly, the client delighted with every custom detail of his new vehicle. As I watched him drive off the lot, I felt the familiar satisfaction of a job well done, a customer experience perfectly executed. But Edward's words continued to nag at me, casting a shadow over what should have been a moment of professional pride. Later that evening, alone in my apartment overlooking Lake Washington, I found myself restless. The space was beautifully appointed. I'd finally hired a decorator 3 months earlier, tired of Edward's gentle teasing about my minimalist aesthetic. But it still felt more like a showcase than a home. No personal photos adorned the walls, no mementos cluttered the surfaces. Even my bookshelf held primarily business texts and industry publications, with just a few novels I rarely found time to read. On impulse, I opened my laptop and typed Mark Johnson, Seattle, into the search bar. It had been months since I'd checked in on my ex-husband's activities, a deliberate choice to focus forward rather than backward. But tonight, Edward's concerns about my self-imposed isolation had cracked open a door I'd firmly closed. The search results loaded quickly. Mark had indeed landed at Eastlake Exotics, as industry rumors had suggested. According to their website, he was now their executive sales director, a title that seemed designed to soothe his wounded ego. There were several photos of him with satisfied customers beside gleaming Italian sports cars, his smile as confident as ever. I scrolled further, finding a recent article in the local business journal profiling Eastlake's expansion plans. Mark was quoted extensively, outlining his vision for growing their market share in the ultra-luxury segment. Nothing in his polished responses hinted at the professional setback he'd experienced at Prestige. He'd landed on his feet, crafting a new narrative that positioned his move to Eastlake as a strategic career advancement. I shouldn't have been surprised. Mark had always been skilled at presenting himself in the most favorable light, at turning setbacks into stepping stones. It was part of what had made him such an effective salesperson, and I now recognized, such a convincing husband. Just as I was about to close the browser, a social media link caught my eye. A photo from a charity gala the previous weekend. Mark stood smiling in a tuxedo, his arm around a striking blonde woman I didn't recognize. The caption identified her as Eastlake Exotics Executive Sales Director Mark Johnson and fiancé, interior designer Caroline Wade. Fiancé. The word landed like a physical blow, unexpected in its impact. Mark was engaged, already rebuilding, the life that had shattered when I revealed my ownership of Prestige. Somehow, in my mind, he had existed in a state of suspended animation, still reeling from the consequences of his actions, still processing the collapse of our marriage. The reality that he had simply moved on, that he was planning a future, with someone new shouldn't have affected me, but it did. I closed the laptop abruptly, moving to the floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased Seattle's twinkling skyline. Why did it bother me? I didn't want Mark back. That chapter was definitively closed. Our divorce had been finalized months ago. I had no claim on his future, no interest in his personal life. And yet, seeing him so completely recovered, so demonstrably, unburdened by our past, made me question my own state. While I had thrived professionally, my personal life remained frozen in the moment of his betrayal. Cautious, defensive, isolated. Mark, it seemed, had simply discarded our history and stepped into a new narrative, complete with a different leading lady. My phone rang, startling me from my brooding. It was Melissa, one of the friends I'd had dinner with the previous week. "Hey, workaholic," she greeted me cheerfully. "Kate and I are going to that new jazz club downtown tonight. Last-minute thing. Any chance we can drag you away from spreadsheets and profit margins for a few hours of actual fun?" My instinct was to decline, to cite early meetings or pending reports. But Edward's words echoed in my mind. Life is meant to be lived, not merely managed. "What time?" I heard myself asking. Melissa's surprise was audible. "Seriously? No. Excuses about quarterly reviews or inventory assessments?" "Don't push your luck," I warned, smiling despite myself. "I might change my mind." 8 o'clock, dress cute, we'll text you the address. After hanging up, I stood for a moment in the center of my pristine living room, considering the unexpected turn my evening had taken. Then I moved purposefully toward my bedroom closet, determined to find something that wasn't a business suit or casual loungewear, the only two modes I seem to operate in lately. 3 hours later, I found myself at Azure, Seattle's newest upscale jazz venue, squeezed into a small table near the stage with Melissa and Kate. The space was intimate and elegant, with deep blue walls, subtle lighting, and a sophisticated crowd of music lovers sipping craft cocktails. "I still can't believe you actually came out on a Thursday night," Kate marveled, raising her glass in a mock toast. "What happened to 'I never socialize on weeknights because mornings are too important'?" I smiled, taking a sip of my whiskey. Sour. "Maybe I'm turning over a new leaf." "About time," Melissa chimed in. "We were starting to think you'd become permanently fused to your office chair." Their teasing was good-natured, but it carried an undertone of genuine concern that reminded me of Edward's earlier comments. Had I really become so predictable? So one-dimensional? "I've been focused," I acknowledged. "Maybe too focused." "Understandable," Kate said, her tone softening. "After everything with Mark, throwing yourself into work was probably the healthiest coping mechanism available." Melissa nodded in agreement. "Better than what I did after my divorce. Dated half of Seattle's eligible bachelor population in .dr. Some misguided attempt to prove I was still desirable." "How did that work out for you?" I asked, grateful for the shift away from my own situation. "Well, I met Daniel, so ultimately it was a success story," she replied with a grin, referring to her current boyfriend of 2 years. "But there were some truly horrifying stops along the way." As they launched into stories of dating disasters and relationship mishaps, I felt a knot inside me begin to loosen. Here, away from spreadsheets and strategic plans, surrounded by good music and genuine laughter, I glimpsed what Edward had been, trying to tell me that life existed beyond the carefully controlled environment I'd constructed for myself. The band took a break, and our conversation shifted to Kate's recent promotion and Melissa's upcoming vacation to Portugal. Neither mentioned Mark or my divorce directly, but I could sense them carefully navigating around the topic, unsure of what might trigger painful memories. "He's engaged," I said suddenly, surprising even myself with the abrupt statement. They exchanged a quick glance before Kate asked gently, "Mark?" I nodded. "To some interior designer named Caroline. I saw it online tonight." "Wow," Melissa said. "That seems fast." "Are you okay?" Kate asked, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. I considered the question seriously. "Yes," I said finally. "I'm okay. It's just strange to see him moving on so completely while I've been..." I gestured vaguely, searching for the right words. "In a holding pattern?" Kate suggested. "Exactly." The description was perfect. Like I've been suspended between my old life and whatever comes next, unable to fully step into something new. Melissa studied me thoughtfully. "Maybe this is what you needed. Confirmation that the past is really past. Permission to start your next chapter." "I don't need Mark's permission for anything," I said, more sharply than I intended. "Not his." "Permission," Kate clarified. "Your own. Sometimes we hold ourselves back without even realizing it." Her observation hit uncomfortably close to the truth. Had I been using work not just as a distraction but as a barrier, a way to avoid the vulnerability of new connections, new possibilities? "So, what's next for Rachel Johnson?" Melissa asked, deftly changing the subject's direction. "Now that you've conquered the luxury car world, what mountain are you planning to climb?" I smiled at her characterization. "Hardly conquered, but I am working on expanding, creating a small group of specialized dealerships that maintain their individual identities while benefiting from shared resources." "That sounds impressive," Kate said. and completely on brand for your workaholic tendencies. But I think what Melissa was asking about was your personal mountain. Dating, hobbies, something that doesn't involve profit margins? Put that way, the question left me momentarily speechless. What did I want for myself beyond business success? Before Mark, I'd had clear personal goals alongside my professional ones. A family someday, travel ambitions, even creative pursuits like photography that had fallen by the wayside during my marriage. Now, those personal dreams had been replaced by spreadsheets and acquisition plans. I don't know, I admitted finally. I haven't thought about it in those terms lately. Well, start thinking, Melissa advised, because Ms. Johnson, with all due respect to your impressive business empire, there's more to life than selling fancy cars to rich people. The band returned to the stage then, saving me from having to formulate a response. As the music washed over us, I found myself truly relaxing for the first time in months, perhaps even years. The jazz ensemble was excellent, skilled musicians, playing with both technical precision and emotional depth. I closed my eyes, letting the melodies carry me away from balance sheets and inventory reports, from thoughts of Mark and his new fiancée, from the careful fortress I'd built around my heart. When I opened them again, I noticed a man at the bar watching our table, or more specifically, watching me. He was attractive in an understated way, with dark hair touched with silver at the temples and an air of quiet confidence. When our eyes met, he didn't look away, but offered a small, almost apologetic smile before turning back to his drink. "Don't look now," Melissa whispered, immediately alerting me to the fact that she'd noticed the exchange. "But the guy at the bar has been checking you out for the past 20 minutes. "He has not," I countered, feeling a strange flutter of nervousness. How long had it been since I'd even noticed male attention, let alone considered responding to it? "Oh, he absolutely has," Kate confirmed. "And he's cute. You should go talk to him." "I'm not going to approach a random stranger in a bar," I protested. "I'm not 19 anymore." "Fine," Melissa sighed dramatically. "Then I'll go invite him over." "Don't you dare," I hissed, grabbing her arm as she made to stand up. "Melissa, I swear." "Relax," she laughed, settling back into her seat. "I'm not actually going to embarrass you, but you should know that you're allowed to be interested in someone. It's not a betrayal of anything." Her words landed with unexpected weight. Was that what I'd been feeling? That showing interest in someone new would somehow validate Mark's betrayal? As if moving on meant what he did wasn't so terrible after all? The rest of the evening passed, pleasantly, with more music, another round of drinks, and conversation that carefully avoided both my ex-husband and the man at the bar, who eventually left with a group of friends. By the time we said our goodbyes outside the club, I felt lighter than I had in months, as if some invisible burden had shifted slightly off my shoulders. "We should do this more often," Kate said, hugging me goodbye. "And not just once every 6 weeks when we practically have to kidnap you from your office." "I'll work on it," I promised, meaning it more than I had expected to. As my rideshare pulled away from the curb, I found myself reflecting on the evening's unexpected emotional journey. From discovering Mark's engagement, to acknowledging my self-imposed isolation, to feeling that first tentative spark of interest in a stranger across a crowded room. Small steps, perhaps, but significant ones for someone who had been standing still for so long. Back in my apartment, instead of checking emails or reviewing reports as was my usual nighttime routine, I curled up on the sofa with a cup of tea, allowing myself to simply be present in the moment. My phone buzzed with a text from Edward. "Hope, you found some balance today." I smiled, typing back. "Jazz with friends instead of spreadsheets with takeout. Baby steps." His response came quickly. "Growth doesn't have to be dramatic to be meaningful. Proud of you." As I set the phone aside, my gaze fell on an unmarked box in the corner of my living room. one of the few items I'd brought from my former home with Mark that I hadn't yet unpacked. On impulse, I crossed the room and opened it, revealing the Nikon camera I'd once loved, unused now for nearly 2 years. I lifted it carefully, feeling its familiar weight in my hands. Photography had been my creative outlet in college and early in my career, a way to see the world differently, to capture moments of beauty or significance that might otherwise go unnoticed. When had I stopped making time for this part of myself? I carried the camera to the window, looking out at the Seattle skyline glittering against the night sky. Without overthinking it, I raised the viewfinder to my eye, adjusted the settings from memory, and clicked the shutter. The sound was satisfying in a way I'd forgotten, the mechanical confirmation of a moment preserved. It wasn't a particularly artistic shot, taken through glass with city lights reflecting off the window pane, but it represented something important, a small act of reconnection with the person I'd been before Mark, before betrayal, before I'd narrowed my life to the safe confines of balance sheets and business plans. As I set the camera on the coffee table, I thought about what Kate had said earlier, that sometimes we hold ourselves back without realizing it. Perhaps it was time to stop guarding against hypothetical future pain and start building something new, something that encompassed more than just professional success. Mark had moved on, constructing a new life complete with a new relationship. And while I had no interest in rushing into another romance, I could at least begin expanding my world beyond the careful boundaries I'd established. Maybe that meant more evenings with friends, rediscovering abandoned hobbies, or simply being open to possibilities I'd been systematically shutting down. My phone buzzed again, this time with a text from Melissa. "Thanks for coming out tonight. Same time next week?" Instead of my usual deflection or qualified maybe, I typed back a simple response. "Count me in." Small steps indeed, but in the right direction. For the first time in months, I fell asleep not thinking about dealership metrics or acquisition strategies, but about the possibility that the most important rebuilding project wasn't Prestige Auto Group. It was Rachel Johnson herself. 1. Year after the day I walked into that boardroom and changed the course of my life forever, I stood in the expansive showroom of Prestige Auto Group, champagne flute in hand, surrounded by employees, clients, and industry colleagues. The space had been transformed for the evening, subtle lighting accentuating the curves of our most impressive vehicles, elegant floral arrangements softening the typically masculine environment, a string quartet playing softly in the corner. "Your attention, please," David Chen called, tapping his glass gently. The room quieted as he stepped forward. "I'd like to propose a toast to Rachel Johnson, whose vision and leadership have transformed Prestige Auto Group over the past year." All eyes turned to me, glasses raised in acknowledgement. David continued, "Under Rachel's guidance, we've increased sales by 23%, expanded our certified pre-owned program by 40%, and most importantly, created a workplace where integrity and customer satisfaction are paramount." To Rachel, the room echoed, a chorus of voices and clinking glasses. I smiled, accepting the acknowledgement with a slight nod. "Thank you all, but this success isn't mine alone. It belongs to everyone in this room, from our sales team to service technicians, from finance to detailing. Each of you contributes daily to what Prestige has become." As I spoke, my gaze swept across the gathered crowd, noting with satisfaction how many faces I now knew by name. Not just job titles or departments, but individuals with stories, strengths, and aspirations I'd taken time to learn. This was perhaps the change I was most proud of. My evolution from a distant owner focused solely on numbers to a leader who understood that business success was built on human connections. The formalities concluded, guests broke into smaller groups, mingling among the luxury vehicles that served as both our product and our backdrop. I moved through the room, stopping to chat with longtime clients, congratulate team members on recent achievements, and welcome industry partners who had come to celebrate our milestone. "Quite a transformation," a familiar voice observed as I paused near a sleek silver Aston Martin. I turned to find Edward approaching, looking distinguished in a tailored suit that emphasized his still athletic frame despite his advancing years. "The showroom does clean up nicely," I agreed, gesturing to the elegant surroundings. "I wasn't talking about the showroom," he replied with a knowing smile. "I was referring to its owner." I raised an eyebrow. "Careful, Edward. You're dangerously close to saying 'I told you so.'" He laughed. "I would never be so tactless, but I am proud of what you've accomplished, not just with the business, but with yourself." His observation wasn't wrong. The past 6 months had marked a gradual but significant shift in my approach to life after Mark. What had begun with that impromptu jazz club outing had evolved into a deliberate reclaiming of parts of myself I'd neglected or abandoned. My photography, regular social outings with friends, even a weekend wellness retreat that would have been unthinkable during my workaholic phase. "Small steps," I reminded him, echoing the phrase that had become something of a mantra between us. "That add up to significant distance," he completed the thought. "Speaking of which, I understand congratulations are in order regarding velocity. Imports?" I nodded, unable to suppress a smile of satisfaction. After months of careful negotiation, Vanessa Liu had agreed to bring her dealership under the umbrella of what we were now calling Horizon Automotive Group, the parent company for both Prestige and Velocity, with plans to add at least 2 more specialized dealerships in the coming years. The paperwork was finalized yesterday, I confirmed. Vanessa stays on as managing partner with a significant equity stake. We'll announce it publicly next week. 2 luxury dealerships in just over a year, Edward mused. William Harrison would be impressed. The mention of Mark's father brought a momentary pang. Not for Mark himself, but for the mentor figure I'd fabricated in my backstory. In reality, there had been no William Harrison guiding my early career, no father-in-law seeing potential. Others missed. There had only been Edward, steadfast in his support since my parents' death, and my own determination to build something meaningful. "I think my parents would be proud too," I said quietly. Edward's expression softened. "Without question. Catherine always said you had the business instincts your father never quite developed, combined with his unwavering integrity. A powerful combination." Our conversation was interrupted by Naomi, who approached with an apologetic smile. "Sorry to intrude, but the mayor has arrived and is asking to speak with you." "Duty calls," I told Edward. "Save me a dance later?" He nodded, raising his glass in a small salute as I moved across the showroom to greet Seattle's mayor, a car enthusiast who had purchased multiple vehicles from Prestige over the years. The evening continued in a pleasant blur of conversations, congratulations, and the warm glow of achievement recognized. It was nearing 10 when I stepped outside for a moment of quiet, the cool Seattle air a welcome respite from the crowded showroom. The dealership was beautifully illuminated against the night sky, its modern architecture highlighted by strategic lighting that made it a landmark on this stretch of road. From this vantage point, I could see into the showroom through the wall of windows, employees laughing with clients, David earnestly explaining something to a group of industry colleagues, the celebration continuing in full swing. "Quite a view," a voice observed from behind me. I turned to find a man approaching, tall, with dark hair touched with silver at the temples. It took me a moment to place him. The man from the jazz club months earlier, the one Melissa had caught watching our table. "I'm sorry," he said, noting my surprised expression. "I didn't mean to startle you. I just needed some air myself." "It's fine," I replied, studying him more carefully now. He was well dressed in a navy suit that suggested quality without ostentation, his manner confident but not overbearing. "You're with Hanson Automotive Group, right? I saw you speaking with David earlier." He nodded, extending his hand. "Michael?" "Reeves, Chief Operating Officer. And you're Rachel Johnson, the woman of the hour." I shook his hand, noting his firm grip and direct gaze. Hardly that dramatic, but yes, I'm Rachel. What you've done with Prestige is impressive, he said, joining me at the railing that overlooked the illuminated dealership entrance. I've been watching your customer experience innovations with particular interest. The personalized delivery process you've implemented is something we've been considering at Hanson. It's made a significant difference in customer loyalty, I acknowledged. Though I should give credit where it's due, that was largely David's initiative. Implemented with your support, he countered. Good leaders recognize and nurture talent. They don't need to claim every idea as their own. There was something in his tone, a hint of personal experience perhaps, that made me curious. You sound like you've worked with the opposite type. A smile touched his lips. Let's just say the automotive industry hasn't always attracted the most collaborative leadership styles. We fell into easy conversation about industry trends, the challenges of modernizing traditional dealership models, and the potential impact of electric vehicles on the luxury market. Michael was knowledgeable without being pedantic, offering insights that demonstrated both experience and thoughtful analysis. You know, he said after a while, I think we've met before, at Azure, the jazz club downtown, a few months ago. So he did remember. You were at the bar, I confirmed. With friends, I think. He nodded. Colleagues, actually. We'd closed a difficult deal that day. He hesitated briefly before adding, I wanted to come say hello to you that night, but it seemed you were catching up with friends. I didn't want to intrude. That would have been a coincidence, I observed. Meeting randomly at a jazz club only to discover we're in the same industry. Seattle's a small city in some ways, he replied with a slight shrug, especially certain circles. A comfortable silence fell between us as we both looked out at the city lights. It was Michael who finally broke it. I should probably head back inside, he said. But before I do, and at the risk of being too forward, would you be interested in continuing this conversation sometime? Perhaps over dinner? The invitation, though not entirely unexpected given the direction of our interaction, still caught me slightly off guard. It had been well over a year since my separation from Mark, months since our divorce was finalized. Yet this was the first time I'd seriously considered the possibility of a date. Michael must have sensed my hesitation. No pressure, he added. It's just that good conversation about something other than quarterly projections is surprisingly rare. His self-deprecating tone made me smile. That's unfortunately true, I agreed. After a brief moment of consideration, I made my decision. Dinner would be nice. He looked genuinely pleased. Great. Is it all right if I get your number? Or would you prefer to take mine? We exchanged contact information. The transaction, comfortable and straightforward. As we prepared to return to the party, Michael paused. Just to be clear, he said, Hanson Automotive Group has no acquisition interest in Prestige or your New Horizon parent company. This isn't that kind of dinner. I appreciated his directness. Good to know, though for the record, Horizon isn't for sale anyway. His smile widened. Didn't think it was. That's part of what makes you interesting, Rachel Johnson. You're building something, not looking for an exit strategy. With that observation lingering between us, we returned to the celebration, parting ways as we entered the showroom. For the remainder of the evening, I was aware of his presence across the room, occasionally catching his eye as we each circulated among the guests. There was something quietly compelling about him, a depth that intrigued me. Later, as the event wound down and guests began to depart, Edward found me again. Successful evening, I'd say, he observed, watching as staff began the discreet process of transitioning the showroom back to its normal configuration. And not just for Prestige. I gave him a questioning look. I saw you speaking with Michael Reeves outside, he explained. He's well respected in the industry. Turned down the CEO position at Hanson twice, apparently. Prefers the operational side to being the public face. You've done your homework. I noted, amused by his not-so-subtle interest. "Just looking out for you," he replied innocently. Though my sources tell me he's also divorced, no children, sits on the board of the Children's Hospital Foundation, and makes excellent paella. I laughed outright at this. "Your sources? Have you been running background checks on every single man in Seattle's business community?" "Only the ones worth your consideration," he admitted with a completely unapologetic grin. "Which, I might add, is a very short list." I shook my head, both exasperated and touched by his protective instinct. "Well, you'll be pleased to know your vetting wasn't wasted. We're having dinner next week." Edward's expression softened into genuine pleasure. "Good for you, Rachel. Small steps, remember?" "Small steps," I agreed, looking around at the showroom that had been the center of my world for the past year. Important still, but no longer all-consuming. Though I think tonight might qualify as a slightly larger one. The following morning, I woke early despite the late night, energized rather than exhausted. After a quick run along the lakefront path near my apartment, another habit I'd reclaimed. In recent months, I showered and dressed casually in jeans and a light sweater. Today wasn't a work day, a boundary I'd established with increasing firmness as part of my effort to create a more balanced life. I made coffee and carried it to the small balcony that had become my favorite morning spot. The view wasn't as spectacular as from my living room windows, but it felt more intimate somehow, more connected to the world below. Weekend joggers moved along the lakeside paths. Couples walked dogs. Families headed to brunch or parks or whatever activities filled their Saturday mornings. My phone chimed with a text message. Expecting Melissa or Kate checking in about our dinner plans that evening, I was surprised to see Michael's name on the screen. "Good morning. Hope I'm not overstepping with a next day text, but I wanted to say I enjoyed our conversation last night. Looking forward to dinner next week." The message was simple, direct, neither presumptuous nor overly cautious. I found myself smiling as I typed back, "Not overstepping at all. I enjoyed talking with you too. Have a good weekend." His response came quickly. "You as well. I'm off to help my nephew build a science project. Apparently, I'm good with tools. We'll see if that reputation survives the day." The casual glimpse into his personal life, an uncle helping with a science project on a Saturday, humanized him beyond our professional connection or potential dating interest. I found myself curious about this man who moved easily between corporate leadership and weekend family obligations. Setting my phone aside, I tried to analyze my own response to this development. Was I genuinely interested in Michael as a person, or was I simply ready to prove something to myself, that I could move forward, that Mark's betrayal hadn't permanently damaged my ability to connect with someone new? The question lingered as I moved through my weekend. Dinner with friends that evening, a Sunday morning photography excursion to capture autumn colors in Discovery Park, afternoon coffee with Edward to discuss Horizon's expansion plans. By the Wednesday evening arrived, bringing with it my dinner with Michael. I had settled into cautious optimism, neither expecting too much nor closing myself off to possibilities. We met at Altura, an intimate Italian restaurant known for its seasonal tasting menus and carefully selected wine pairings. Michael was already seated when I arrived, rising to greet me with a warm smile that reached his eyes. "You look lovely," he said simply as I took my seat across from him. "Thank you," I replied, appreciating his straightforward compliment. I'd chosen a deep green wrap dress that I genuinely liked, rejecting several outfits that felt like they were trying too hard or not hard enough. The peculiar calculus of first date dressing I hadn't navigated in over a decade. Any concerns? About awkward silences or forced conversation proved unfounded as we fell easily into discussion, beginning with shared observations about the restaurant's design before moving to more personal territory. I learned that Michael had grown up in Portland, studied engineering at Stanford, and accidentally entered the automotive industry, when a summer internship at a manufacturing plant evolved into a career path he hadn't anticipated, but ultimately embraced. "What about you?" he asked as we finished our first course. "Was the luxury car industry always your destination?" I considered how to answer, conscious of the complicated truth behind my entry into automotive retail. "Not exactly," I said finally. "I started in financial consulting, specializing in business acquisitions. Prestige was actually my first direct ownership venture." "Quite a starting point," he observed. "Most people don't begin their ownership career with a well-established luxury dealership." It was a unique situation, I acknowledged, not yet ready to share the full story of my marriage and its dissolution. The right opportunity at the right time. Michael seemed to sense my reticence and deftly changed the subject, asking about my photography hobby, which I'd mentioned in passing. From there, our conversation flowed through shared interests in travel, architecture, and Seattle's evolving culinary scene. By the time dessert arrived, a delicate panna cotta with seasonal berries, I found myself genuinely enjoying Michael's company. He was intelligent without being pedantic, confident without arrogance, and possessed a subtle humor that manifested in wry observations rather than obvious jokes. "This has been wonderful," he said as we finished our coffee, "but I should probably confess something." I felt a momentary tightening in my chest, conditioned perhaps by Mark's betrayals to expect disappointing revelations. "I did know who you were that night at the jazz club," he continued. "In the industry, your acquisition of prestige and the subsequent leadership change was something of a talked-about event." Relief replaced my flash of concern. "I see," I said, studying him across the table. "Professional curiosity?" He shook his head. "More personal than that. I admired what I'd heard. A woman who stepped in to lead a troubled dealership, implemented significant positive changes, and managed to improve both customer satisfaction and profitability in a traditionally male-dominated industry." He smiled, slightly. "That you also happened to be beautiful was, I'll admit, not irrelevant to my interest." His honesty was refreshing, devoid of the calculated charm Mark had so often deployed. "So, you've had me at a bit of an information disadvantage," I observed, not entirely displeased by the revelation. "Only in the most general sense," he assured me. "Industry gossip is notoriously unreliable, and I make it a policy not to believe everything I hear. I wanted to form my own impressions." "And have you?" I asked. "Formed your impressions?" Michael considered this, his expression thoughtful. "I've formed preliminary ones," he finally replied. "But I find myself wanting to know more, beyond the business success and professional accomplishment. I'd like to know Rachel the person, not just Rachel the dealership owner." His answer surprised me with its perceptiveness. How many people in my life, especially since the divorce, had seen me primarily through the lens of my business identity? How often had I encouraged exactly that perspective, finding safety in being defined by professional success rather than personal vulnerability? "That might take more than one dinner," I said, testing the waters of his continued interest. "I was hoping you'd say that," he replied, his smile warming his entire face. "Because I'd very much like there to be a second dinner, and perhaps something less formal than dinner after that." As we left the restaurant, Michael walking me to my car in the light Seattle drizzle that barely qualified as rain, I felt a sense of possibility I hadn't experienced in longer than I could remember. When he asked if he could kiss me goodnight, the question offered with respect rather than assumption, I found myself nodding. The kiss was brief, a gentle pressing of lips that carried promise without demand. As we parted, his hand lightly touching my arm in farewell, I realized I was smiling. Not the polite, measured smile I offered at business functions, but something more genuine, something that reflected actual pleasure rather than social obligation. I'll call you tomorrow?" he asked, the slight question in his tone giving me the space to decline if I wished. "I'd like that," I replied simply. Driving home, I felt a curious lightness, as if some long-held tension had begun to release. It wasn't that one pleasant. Evening with an attractive man had magically healed the wounds of Mark's betrayal, or erased the caution his actions had instilled in me. Rather, it was the realization that I could still connect with someone, still feel interest and attraction, still contemplate the possibility of a relationship not tainted by my past experiences. When I arrived home, I found myself drawn not to my laptop or work files, but to the balcony where I often began my mornings. The city stretched before me, lights twinkling against the night sky, reflecting off the water of Lake Washington. On impulse, I retrieved my camera, experimenting with night photography, capturing the interplay of light and shadow, the geometric patterns of illuminated buildings against the darkness. As I reviewed the images on my camera's display, I was struck by their unexpected beauty, imperfect perhaps, given the challenging lighting conditions, but compelling in their contrast and complexity. Much like life itself, I mused, with its intermingling of light and shadow, clarity and ambiguity. My phone rang, the sound drawing me back from my philosophical musings. Edward's name appeared on the screen. "Isn't it past your bedtime?" I teased, answering. "Occupational hazard of being a concerned godfather," he replied. "How was dinner?" I smiled at his transparent concern, barely disguised as casual interest. "It was nice. Really nice, actually." Care to elaborate for an old man who lives vicariously through his goddaughter's social life? I laughed, settling into one of the balcony chairs. We talked. We ate excellent food. He kissed me goodnight. And yes, there will likely be a second date. "Well, well," Edward said, satisfaction evident in his voice. "Look at you, living a fully dimensional life." "Don't get ahead of yourself," I cautioned. "It was one dinner." "One dinner is how everything begins," he pointed out. "But I won't press for details you're not ready to share. I'm just glad to hear happiness in your voice." After we hung up, I remained on the balcony, contemplating Edward's observation. Was there happiness in my voice? It seemed too strong a word for the tentative pleasure I was experiencing, the cautious opening to possibility. But there was something, a lightening, a softening perhaps, of the defensive shell I'd constructed around myself. The following weeks brought a series of dates with Michael. Dinner again, yes, but also a Saturday morning at the farmer's market, an afternoon at a photography exhibit I'd mentioned wanting to see, an evening at another jazz club where we sat, side by side, shoulders touching lightly as we listened to the music. Each encounter deepened my understanding of him, his thoughtfulness, his dry humor, his natural ease with waiting staff and parking attendants that spoke to an ingrained respect for people regardless of their position. Equally important, each date allowed me to rediscover aspects of myself that had nothing to do with business acumen or professional accomplishment. My enjoyment of live music, my appreciation for thoughtful conversation, my capacity for laughter and lightness when not weighed down by responsibility and wariness. By our fifth date, I felt comfortable enough to share more of my story. Not all at once, but in measured pieces that Michael received without judgment or excessive sympathy. I told him about my marriage to Mark, his role at Prestige, my eventual discovery of his infidelity, and the complexity of our professional and personal entanglement. "So, you owned his dealership without him knowing?" Michael asked, his expression a mixture of surprise and impressed admiration. We were sitting on a bench overlooking Elliott Bay, having just walked through the Olympic Sculpture Park on an unseasonably sunny Sunday afternoon. The setting, public yet private with the constant movement of water and people creating a sense of life in motion, felt right for this conversation. "Yes," I confirmed. "It wasn't originally about catching him or exposing him. It was a business opportunity that happened to involve his workplace. The timing of the revelation was influenced by personal factors. Namely, him spending your anniversary with another woman, Michael noted, recalling the detail I'd shared earlier. I nodded, watching a ferry move across the bay. It was the catalyst, yes, but the underlying issues, his financial mismanagement, his treatment of staff, his prioritization of personal gain over company health, those were legitimate business concerns, independent of his infidelity. Michael was quiet for a moment, seemingly processing this information. That must have been incredibly difficult, he finally said, navigating the personal betrayal while making complex business decisions that affected many people's livelihoods. His response, focused on the challenges I'd faced rather than passing judgment on either my actions or Mark's, felt refreshingly balanced. It was, I acknowledged. There were times I questioned whether my business decisions were being unduly influenced by personal feelings, but ultimately I believe I made the right calls for the right reasons. The results certainly suggest as much, Michael observed. Prestige is thriving under your ownership. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the play of light on water. It was Michael who eventually spoke again. Thank you for sharing that with me, he said simply. I appreciate your trust. Thank you for listening, I replied. It's not exactly standard early dating conversation. He smiled at this. I don't think either of us is particularly standard in any respect. As we continued our walk along the waterfront, I felt a subtle but significant shift, a lightening, as if the act of sharing my story had released some residual weight I'd been carrying. Michael hadn't reacted with either excessive sympathy that cast me as a victim or skepticism that questioned my motives. He had simply listened and accepted, allowing the information to deepen his understanding of me without fundamentally altering his perception. 2 months into our relationship, for it was clearly that now, though we hadn't explicitly labeled it, Michael invited me to dinner at his home, a modernist house on a hillside in Magnolia with sweeping views of the Sound. I arrived to find him in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, preparing the paella Edward had mentioned in his initial intelligence report. I hope you like seafood, he said, looking up from where he was carefully arranging mussels and prawns in a wide, shallow pan. I should have confirmed before committing to this menu. I love seafood, I assured him, accepting the glass of wine he'd poured for me. And I've heard rumors about your paella skills. He raised an eyebrow. Rumors? Should I be concerned about your sources? Let's just say my godfather is thorough in his protective duties, I replied with a smile. Michael laughed. Edward Bennett, right? I met him at your anniversary celebration. Distinguished gentleman with penetrating eyes who asked me very specific questions about my 5-year plan and whether I owned any motorcycles. I groaned in embarrassment. He didn't. He absolutely did, Michael confirmed, returning to his cooking. But I respected it. He cares about you. He's been like a father to me since my parents died, I explained, settling onto a stool at the kitchen island. Especially after the divorce, he's been my most consistent support. Michael nodded, his expression thoughtful as he stirred the rice. Having someone in your corner like that is invaluable. I've been lucky to have my sister play a similar role for me, especially after my own divorce. This was new information. Though Michael had mentioned being divorced, he hadn't shared details, and I hadn't pressed. How long were you married? I asked, genuinely curious about this part of his past. 8 years, he replied. It ended about 3 years ago. No dramatic betrayal like yours, just a gradual growing apart that neither of us had the tools or perhaps the motivation to address until it was too late. The frank assessment, devoid of bitterness or blame, spoke to a level of self-reflection and emotional maturity I found deeply attractive. Dinner was as delicious as promised, the paella rich with saffron and seafood, complemented by a crisp, Spanish white wine. As we lingered over dessert, a simple but perfect flan, the conversation turned naturally toward the future, both immediate and longer term. Hansen is sending me to the European Luxury Auto Expo next month, Michael mentioned. 10 days in Munich and Stuttgart. I was wondering if you might consider joining me for part of it. Not the business portions, obviously, but perhaps the weekend between? Germany in early December is quite beautiful, especially with the Christmas markets. The invitation caught me by surprise, not unpleasantly, but it represented a significant step in our evolving relationship. Travel together, international travel at that, carried different implications than dinner dates or afternoon walks. You don't have to answer now, he added, noting my hesitation. It's just something to consider. I appreciated his giving me space to think, not pressuring for an immediate response. I'll definitely consider it, I said honestly. It sounds wonderful. Later, as we moved from the dining room to the living room with its panoramic windows showcasing Seattle's twinkling skyline, our conversation shifted to more personal territory. Can I ask you something? Michael said, settling beside me on the sofa, close but not crowding. Of course. After your divorce, after everything that happened with Mark, did you think you'd be here again? Opening yourself to a relationship? The question was asked without pressure or expectation, a genuine curiosity about my emotional journey. I considered my answer carefully. No, I said finally. For a long time, I didn't. I threw myself into work, into building prestige and then Horizon. It felt safer, more controllable than personal vulnerability. I turned slightly to face him, more directly. But a wise friend kept reminding me that life is meant to be lived, not merely managed. Edward again? Michael guessed with a smile. I nodded. He was right, though it took me time to recognize it. And now? He asked, his voice quieter. Now I'm sitting here with you, I replied simply. Not rushing, not forcing anything, but open to possibility in a way I couldn't have imagined a year ago. His hand found mine, our fingers interlacing naturally. I'm glad, he said, because I find myself increasingly invested in those possibilities. The kiss that followed was different from our previous ones, deeper, more urgent, carrying a current of desire we'd both kept carefully banked until now. When he pulled back slightly, his eyes questioning, I made my decision. Yes, I said softly, answering the unasked question. I want to stay. Later, lying in his bed with the moonlight filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows, I felt a profound sense of rightness, not the breathless infatuation of new romance, but something quieter and potentially more lasting. A connection built on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine interest in each other as complete people, not projections or possessions. Michael's arm tightened slightly around me, his breathing deep and even in sleep. I remained awake a while, longer, watching the play of moonlight and shadow, thinking about the journey that had brought me here. From the betrayal that had shattered my marriage to the strength I'd found in its aftermath. From professional success to personal renewal. I thought of Mark briefly, wondering if he had found genuine happiness with his new fiancée, or if he was simply repeating patterns, creating a new facade to replace the one that had crumbled. I found I wished him well, not out of residual affection, but because bitterness served no purpose, especially now. Mostly, though, I thought about the future, not with anxiety or rigid planning, but with a sense of open possibility. Horizon Automotive Group would continue to grow, providing me with the professional challenges and achievements I valued. My friendship with Edward would remain a cornerstone of my life, his wisdom and support irreplaceable. My rediscovered passions for photography, music, and genuine connection would continue to enrich my days. And Michael? That remained to be seen. What we were building felt promising, substantial in a way my relationship with Mark never had, despite its outward trappings of success. But I was in no rush to define or solidify it, content to let it unfold naturally, each of us bringing our full, authentic selves to the connection. As sleep finally claimed me, I found myself thinking of that moment in the boardroom a year earlier, the pivotal point when I'd reclaimed control of my narrative, refusing to be defined by Mark's betrayal, or limited by his expectations. It had been an ending, yes, but more importantly, it had been a beginning, the first step on a path that had led me here, to this quiet moment of contentment and possibility. Sometimes I reflected as consciousness faded, the most painful endings, open doors to the most unexpected and beautiful beginnings. And sometimes, the strongest revenge isn't about hurting those who harmed you, but about building a life so rich and authentic that their absence becomes not a wound, but a distant memory. Faded and without power, in the morning I would wake to a new day, with its own challenges and joys, its own opportunities for growth and connection. I would continue building my businesses, nurturing my relationships, exploring my passions. I would take small steps, and occasionally larger ones, moving forward not in spite of my past but informed by it, carrying its lessons without being burdened by its pain. For now, though, I simply allowed myself this moment of peace. Body relaxed, mind quiet, heart open to whatever tomorrow might bring. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.